What is up, everyone? Welcome in the next lesson of the microservice stack. We're building a tolling calculator with multiple microservices and everything, right? So basically, in the previous lesson, we did our invoice aggregator, which basically is going to aggregate all the distances. It's the invoice aggregator. It's actually a distance aggregator, right? Maybe we should rename this. So it's basically a distance aggregator is going to aggregate the distances being sent from the distance calculator. And what we're going to do with this aggregator is we are going to fetch basically an invoice. So it should make an invoice. The question rather is, who should actually, do we make another service, or are we doing that in the invoice aggregator itself? That's the question. Because what we're going to do is we're going to make a gateway. And why are we making a gateway? What is a gateway in the first place? So you need to understand that in a microservice infrastructure, you're going to have multiple services, right? And of course, there's going to be some kind of a client. It could be a mobile application. It could be a front end. It could be anything. And that front end is going to retrieve some data. For example, it's, in our case, our front end wants to fetch an invoice for a specific OBU. Right? We want to see, okay, this OBU, give me basically the invoice for this month based on all the distances we calculated by the GPS coordinates he was sending throughout this month, right? That's the goal. So instead of basically directly from the UI, from the mobile app or whatever, directly accessing these microservices, we're going to access our gateway. Why? Because all our authentication, all our stuff is going to be in that gateway, so we don't need to do that for these microservices, right? We don't want to hassle with authentication in each single microservice, because some companies, they'll have like, hey, this is a fact, you can have 100, 200, 300, 400 microservices running. We don't want to implement all that logic there. So it's going to be the gateway is going to be responsible for that stuff. It's basically our API, right? But first of all, we need to make sure that the gateway is going to access this thing. So we need to basically provide another handler here, right? Because right now we can only do aggregate, right? We can call aggregate, but we also going to catch, we also going to call, for example, invoice. And that's going to be handle get invoice or something. Of course, we don't have that. Func handle get invoice. You're going to have a HTTP response writer and then a pointer to an HTTP. And it's going to be a request, right? It's going to be a response writer. That's going to be fine. Handle get invoice is going to be this one. If you can please fix our stuff. So we're going to basically say here, we're going to write something out that's garbage. So we're going to say need to return the invoice. Invoice for OBU ID. For the OBU ID, right? That's what we are going to do here with handle get invoice. So we're going to say make, there's going to be aggregator, make ag, something like that. So the HTTP transport is running. So what we're going to do is open up our Thunder client here. Did I install this? That's actually nasty because it's a new PC. Install Thunder client. Install in WSL2, yeah, of course. WSL2. All right, I think it's going to be installed here. So let's do this. Let's try to do Thunder client here. Yes, new request, that's perfectly fine. So we're gonna try this real quick. We're gonna say localhost 3000 invoice. It's gonna be a get request, why not? Boom. And then we're going to have this response here. If you can see that, it's going to be need to return. Are we in? Yes, we are. Need to return the invoice for OBU ID. This sounds a little bit to the low font size, but hey. But what we're going to do is we're going to do something like this. Invoice, and I'm going to say OBU ID, or basically OBU is going to be, for example, this specific number, and we're going to send that, right? So how are we going to catch that OBU ID? That's a good question, to be honest. That's a good question. I have no clue how to do that. Can we do something like params? Of course, we know that how we need to do that in Fiber, but we don't know how we need to do that here. So I think it's going to be something like URL. Can we do that? Or URL. Let's print that out to see what's going on in here. I'm going to teach you how to basically infer some stuff. This is annoying, and because the font is so huge, if I do like this, that's fine. Println. Going to be RURL. Make egg. Try to do this request once again. Okay, so we're going to see this is going to be the URL. Invoice is this OBU ID is this thing. So I think query maybe it's a function. What's going to do that? Query is going to be it's going to return us some values. That's fine. Let's see what's inside of that. Make egg real quick. Do a new request. Boom. Okay, so we're going to have a map, right? So that's basically nice. So this is going to give us a map, right? I'm going to say OBU ID. It's going to be RURL query, and then we're going to say OBU. And I'm going to see if is that going to work. Println. So annoying. I don't understand what's going on here. OBU ID. Yeah, fine. That's why I sometimes like to use Vim more, but hey, this is basically much easier for you to follow, right? Because we have Thunder client and everything, it's fine. All right, new request sent here. Okay, cool. It's still going to be a slice. That's annoying. That's really annoying. So we're going to do something like this. Actually, to be honest, we should do this. It's a little bit sketchy, I'm not gonna lie. We're gonna fix that. All right, we're gonna have this. There's gonna be a problem, right? What if we do this? Right, then we're gonna have a panic. Why? Index out of range. So we need to fix that right now, right? How can we do that? I think we're gonna make a simple helper function or something. Yeah, or basically, yeah, it depends because we're not going to use this multiple times, right? So we're going to do values. Okay, is going to be RURL query. OBU, right? I'm going to say if okay, we are going to say W. Right header HTTP status bad request because we're expecting an OBU ID actually, and we can actually write that if you want. I think we have write JSON. Is that true? Yeah, we have that. That's nice. Write JSON. So we're going to say HTTP status bad request. Request, by the way, not gateway. And then we're going to say a map string. String is fine. We're going to say error missing OBU ID. Is that a thing here? Map string error yada yada. I think we miss the response writer here. I think that's the problem. We're going to return here. So that's that. And then we're going to have values. So we don't need that. So we can print that out. Then we're going to say, I think values is always going to be present if we fetch the OBU ID. Let me quickly do this. Values, right? Make egg. Let's see if that's going to work. Boom. So missing OBU ID, even though I think we can always index because we're gonna, if the OBU is missing, we're gonna print out this missing OBU ID. That's pretty fine, right? So and if we do question mark OBU, is going to be this crazy number, then it's going to be perfectly fine, and we're going to have these values, right? So that's all working fine. So basically, we could say OBU ID is going to be values, the first in the values. It's always going to work, right? So that's fine. Okay, so now we need to do something with this OBU ID. So, of course, we don't have access to our service, so we need to do some decoration like we did here with handle aggregate. So we're going to do the same thing. First of all, I'm going to copy this, right? And I'm going to return this anonymous function. We need to do this, wrap that up in that. Now we're going to say handle get invoice. And that's going to be a service, and it's going to be an aggregator. Yep. And we're going to return an HTTP handler func. Just like that. And then we're going to say here SVC. And now we're going to have access to this service because, do we have something like a store or something? Let me quickly check. We have a storage, that's fine. Let me see what this thing can do. Insert, get. Maybe we're going to say get invoice. There's going to be get distance, right? That's the thing. Get. Now I'm thinking actually here. Distance. How do we store that? We don't know. Invoice aggregator store. Do we have an implementation of that? We don't. Let's focus on the file explorer real quick. We have. It's going to be, it's perfectly fine. It's going to be an integer. That's going to be the OBU ID. Yeah. We got this. So what we're going to do is basically open up store. What's going on? It's so annoying here. Not store. Service, I think. Yeah, the store is here. It's a little bit of annoying. Get, it's going to be an ID, it's going to be an integer, and it's going to return us two things. A float 64 of the distance, the accumulated distance. Get sum, get distance. Are we going to sum that up? Get is fine. Float, error. Just like that, let's open up store, let's implement that thing. Let's copy this function, paste that in. Let's do get, and that's going to be an ID, it's going to be an int. We're going to return a float 64 and an error. So we're going to say distance, okay, is going to be m data ID, right? If not okay, right, we're going to return an error here, right? So we're going to return 00 here, fmt error f. Could not find distance for OBU ID %s. No, it's going to be D actually, to be honest. ID, right? That's that. Otherwise, we're going to return the distance and nil. Easy peasy weasy. It's annoying. Main? We don't need main. What do we need? We need to... service maybe. Fine. Oh, it's a main. My bad. This is the wrong main. Aggregator. This one. So we're gonna have this OBU ID here. The only thing we need to do is basically say that the distance error is going to be SVC store. Do we have access to that thing? Yeah. Okay, cool. We need to do something else. We need to go to service real quick because we need to implement another method here. For example, get distance sum. And that's going to return, do we need an OBU ID? We need that. So we're going to say float 64 error. We're going to implement that real quick. We're going to copy this function, paste that in. And then we're going to say here distance sum, which will basically return the sum of the distances, right? We calculated based on the OBU ID. So we're going to say OBU ID integer, and we're going to return a float 64 error. And we're going to say return I store get OBU ID. I think that's going to be it. Like I said before, the business logic itself is out of scope, right? This is basically how to communicate with these services and all that stuff. Of course, distance sum. In this case, it's very easy because we just store all these distances. We already sum them up in the database. So it's just returning them, right? But that's fine. So going back to main here, distance calculator is going to be aggregator, main aggregator, right? So this is the OBU ID. Now we can say distance R. What's going on here? OBU ID. Distance R is going to be distance sum of this OBU ID. Do we miss something? OBU ID values. Of course, this is going to be a string, guys. This is going to be a string. So we need to do strconf. It's going to be an error also. It's annoying. I'm going to say strconf. Atoy, I think. Is that true? Yeah, it is. We have this OBU ID, perfectly fine. What you also could do is basically check this error because what this is going to do, it's going to convert a string to an integer. So maybe we're going to get this error because if there is an error, that basically means it's an invalid OBU ID. It's an invalid ID, right? So if the error is not null, we can do something like write JSON W HTTP status bad request map string error. And if you want, you can make basically the errors that we did in the JSON API, you could make something like that, right? But because these services are so small, it doesn't actually really matter to make abstractions and abstractions and abstractions. Just do it like that. It's easy. Everybody can maintain it. Everybody can read it. So we're going to say invalid OBU ID. That's what we're going to do here. That's fine. Maybe you're going to make this boom, boom, capitalized. And then we're going to return here, of course. Then we're going to have a distance. If this is an error, so we can copy this, boom, paste that in. There's also going maybe an internal server error, not quite sure. Internal server error. And we're going to say error. Let's do that. Now we have a distance, so we're going to write that out. How do we want to return that? I think very simple. We're going to say write JSON W HTTP status OK. And again, we're going to make a map string any, I think in this case. But this is going to return the distance, right? We don't want to return the distance. Because we want to calculate an invoice. I think we need to do some more. No, guys, we're going to change plans. We're going to change plans. I just thought about something like this. Just came into my mind. I'm so sorry. Well, I'm not sorry. It's basically the way of engineering. We don't want to do that. We basically want to return an invoice. That's what we want to do. So basically, instead of doing this distance sum, I'm going to basically read this. I'm going to say underscore is OBU ID to muck it for the compiler. Let's open up service. What we want to do, instead of making distance sum, we want to return aggregator. Invoice based for an OBU ID, which is an integer, and we're going to return types invoice maybe. Do we have types? I think we're going to make all these types in our types thing. They're going to be fine. Type invoice struct. We're going to say it's going to be an invoice for an OBU ID. Int JSON OBU ID. Let's make it simple and let's give it a total distance. Total distance is going to be a float 64 JSON here. Yeah. Total distance. Yes. Right, so we're going to give this an invoice. We're going to give this OBU ID. This is the total distance. That's the amount we need to pay. So we're going to say amount or something. Because I can basically already see that in a real world scenario, you're going to split out these invoices, but that's basically that's not the scope of the thing, right? So we're going to say the amount, or maybe total amount actually. Total amount is going to be a float 64, which is going to be JSON total amount. Yes, that's what we want in this thing. So now in service here, this calculate distance, we're also going to say maybe calculate invoice or something. No, this is not what we want. The aggregator service, that's what we want. We're gonna call this aggregate distance, and maybe we're gonna say calculate invoice, right? Paste for this ID, and we're gonna return a pointer to a types invoice, and an error. That's what we want. So now, of course, we're gonna have this distance. So we're gonna change this up to calculate invoice. That's gonna return a types. Pointed to a types invoice, by the way. Invoice. Yes, okay, cool. So we're going to say that the invoice is going to be an ntypes.invoice. The OBU ID is going to, of course, going to be this OBU ID, right? And then we're going to say the distance, the total distance, we need to calculate that. So we're going to say dist r, is it error? I think it's going to be okay. It's going to be y store get OBU ID. If not okay, yeah, you're going to return nil fmt error f, and we could say OBU ID not found, something. Let's do a %d here, and then we can say OBU ID, something like that. That's fine. Then we have a distance, so we can say dist here, to be honest. Dist. And then we need to say the total amount. Well, that's a good question, to be honest. We could say, I don't know, const base price is going to be 0.15. We could say, for example, base price times, actually, to be honest, that's going to be, let's call this 315. Sucking that out of my thumb, right? Out of thin air. Base price times the distance. Something like that, right? That's how it's gonna sometimes gonna work. Basically, also based on the type of trick, maybe we can make another mapping or something. That's kind of the easy stuff, right? That's kind of the easy stuff. And then we're gonna basically return this invoice and no error. No. If okay, what's going on here? There's gonna be an error probably, actually, to be honest. This is going to be an error. If not null, we can actually return this error. Just to be honest, we can just return that error because I think we returned this error already, right? Look at this, get processing, yada 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 yada. Where is our storage? Here, could not find distance for OBU ID, yada yada. Hey, fine. Fine for me. Let's open up main here. What's going on? Main aggregator, by the way. Yeah, so here, this OBU, perfectly fine. We're going to say SVC calculates invoice, right? And based for this OBU ID, and that's going to be the invoice error. If the error is not nil, of course. Hands are so cold, and then my keyboard, and oh man, so many things going on. If there is an error, we're gonna return. Actually, to be honest, we can copy these things here, copy that, paste that in, delete this, save. Is it a bad request? It's probably going to be an internal server error. Status, internal server error, map string error, delete this, do error. Why do we do error? Because if you want a string of an error, you need to call error on it. Look at it, right? You see, error is an interface. If you call error on an error, you're gonna get a string. You know what I mean? That's why it is, right? That's the invoice, and then basically what you could do is just write JSON and put in the invoice, right? Of course, we need to have the W and an HTTP status. Okay. We cannot return that because, yeah. Anyway, that's it. Okay, cool. Make run. Ag. Boom. Okay, we have some problem. Cannot use... oh, yeah. So basically, we're using log middleware, right? It's very important. We're using a log middleware. Here, you see... Here, SVC is new log middleware, and we wrap that inside of our service. The problem is that log middleware does not has... and this is actually the beauty, right? Because we're logging our aggregate distance, but we don't log our... we did nothing for calculating the invoice. That's what we need to do, right? This log middleware is basically also just the aggregator interface, which basically means that we need to implement also the calculate invoice, right? Calculate invoice, and that's going to be based on an OBU ID, which is going to be an int. And that's going to return an invoice, right? Which is going to be a types invoice and an error. And of course, we're going to name them. So we're going to say took r is fine. So we're going to say, are we going to print out this invoice? We could say OBU ID. It's going to be the inf.obu ID. We could say something like the distance, total distance. Total list is going to be invoice.total distance. And then we're going to say total amount is going to be total amount, right? Just like that. And we're going to call, this function is going to be calculate invoice, right? And this is going to be m invoice. This inf, yes, fine. Invoice r is m next. Instead of aggregate distance, it's going to be calculate invoice, and we're going to give this OBU ID, boom, and it's all going to work pretty fine. And that's the beauty. This is the beauty of how we set things up, right? It's maybe going to blow your mind. I don't know. Do we have still a Thunder client here somewhere? Yes, here. Woohoo. Yeah. So we're going to send this. Okay, cool. Now we have a problem. Of course, we have a null pointer dereference, right? And these things happen is actually pretty good that we encounter these stuff. The problem is going to be in middleware here, 36, right? That's the problem. It's the invoice is going to be empty. Yeah, that's a thing, because this is important to know, guys. This invoice here is a pointer, right? But if there is an error, we are going to log the error, but we cannot log the invoice here, because the invoice is going to be null. You know what I mean? So that's a little bit annoying. That's actually annoying. So we need to basically delete these things in the logging, because we're going to have an error. And I know what the error is because we don't have any OBU data. Look at that. Boom. Could not find the distance for OBU, and it's perfectly logged that, right? So you see, we log it, right? And the problem is here, distance calculator is in middleware probably somewhere here. The problem is that we're going to log this error, but types invoice is nil. So we cannot log what's going on, right? We cannot log what's going on. We could do some cool stuff, for example. We could say something like this, right? For example, we can make a variables here. If you really want to log that out, you could say distance is going to be a float 64. And we're also going to say that the total amount, or the amount actually, let's shortcut this, is also going to be a float 64. And the OBU ID we can actually already print because we have that in here. You're going to say OBU ID. That's always going to work. And then we're going to say here, if the invoice is not null, we're going to say that the distance is going to be the invoice dot total distance, right? And then we're going to say that the amount is going to be invoice dot total amount, right? Just like that. And then we can do it again. We can say amount is going to be amount here, and then we can say distance, yeah, it's going to be the distance, right? Boom. And then we can kill this, clear the screen, make aggregation, boom, boom, boom. And then we can do this, send, boom. And then you can see, calculate invoice, the amount is 0, the distance is 0 because we have an error, right? So let's basically try to boot some stuff up, right? Let's open up some terminales. Let's make the aggregator in the first thing, that's fine. Then we're gonna make the calculator. D is running, right? It's trying to consume, but it's fine. And then we're gonna make the receiver, right? And then we're gonna make the OBU, right? Boom. So we're gonna see what's going on here. Right, so we are aggregating stuff, right? Our services are working pretty fine. Distance is here, so let's see if we can find the OBU ID somewhere. This is an OBU ID. I'm gonna copy this ID. I'm gonna put that ID inside of our request here, and I'm gonna send, right? And now you can see that we have these total distances, right? And you see they are even basically upgrading. Look at this. Total amount will basically rise up, right? You see that? So we have basically a very big stack already, right? We have this OBU sender and a couple services that communicate with each other. And now we have this API endpoint for our invoice distance aggregator, right? So that's pretty sweet. So basically, now we are also need to make a couple things we can do in the next lesson. Are we going to do our gRPC transport? Are we going to make our gateway? We need to consider it, and then we're going to do some more instrumentation, Grafana, and do more Docker stuff, and boot it all up with the Docker Compose and all that things. And then we have a pretty sweet stack. I'm not going to lie. Of course, the implementation itself of the business logic, yeah, it's pretty simple. But I mean, if you're a programmer, you can. The business logic is not a big of a deal. It's how do we communicate with each other? How do we make these transports? How do we organize this? How do we log these things? And you see, it's pretty sweet, right? We don't need to do a lot of stuff. The logging is not in the business logic. The logging is completely separated. And that's exactly what's also going to happen with the metrics, right? Okay, thanks for watching, and I see you in the next lesson.